Grace and peace to you all, and welcome to another episode of Your Week with St. Luke's, our weekly podcast from St. Luke's United Methodist Church. My name is Jad Denmark. I'm one of the pastors here, and I'm excited about today's episode, where we're going to have conversation with two beloved friends and beloved St. Lukers, Danielle Heider and Ryan Arnold. What's up, guys? Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yes, I'm glad to be here.
You guys are amazing people as just individuals, and your gifts and graces, and how you bless the church. Danielle, you sing in the choir and volunteer with children's ministry. You're also on our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion (DEI) committee, and you're bringing an important voice to that effort. Ryan, you're a candidate for ministry and active in our volunteer and our youth ministry in particular. And I love it. You're an actor, and so you've been in the last two major summer productions here at St. Luke's, including Little Mermaids. So thank you both for another dimension of blessing the community of St. Luke's with your presence here. So July, a lot of people might not know, is Disability Pride Month. And while we're close to the end of July, I want to challenge all St. Lukers and everyone hearing that disability pride, along with LGBTQ pride, is not just a month-long thing, it's a lifelong thing. As disciples of Jesus Christ, we're called to love our neighbor, and becoming more aware and having pride and joy in the people around us, in our community. That's a lifelong pursuit of a disciple of Jesus Christ. And so we're going to have a conversation today about disability pride, raising awareness and talking about language. And we hope and pray that amongst that conversation, each and every one of you all who are listening might grow to find new ways of being, new ways of using language, and new ways of love your neighbor as Jesus has mandated to us. So with that, Danielle, why is July Disability Pride Month?
Sure. So July has been designated as Disability Pride due to the fact that that's when the ADA, which is the Americans with Disabilities Act, was passed, which was July 26, 1990. And fantastic. The ADA allows it's a civil rights act that protects individuals with disabilities, but it also ensures that they have equal access and accessibility to buildings, public programs, and accommodations as well.
Right. Which, I know I'm someone who has two learning disabilities. I'm dyslexic and have short-term memory processing. And I know that I personally benefited greatly from that, going to college and having accommodations available to me. It's that there's a greater awareness and availability. Ryan, what does Disability Pride Month mean for you?
Well, for me, honestly, I didn't even know there was such a thing until a couple of years ago. Mm-hmm. And I have not always been in a place where I've been proud of my disability. It's taken me a while. Mm-hmm. But I think that for me, of Disability Pride Month, it just gives me more of a opportunity to live into who I am and educate other folks around it. I know it's not necessarily my job as a disabled person to educate able-bodied people around disability, but I like doing that because it opens doors and raises awareness. So I'll always share infographics and stuff like that. And it's just amazing what people don't consider because they're not confronted with a thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right. And I so appreciate that. I think that's part of what our DEI and the pastors of St. Luke's want to do with this conversation and many, many more, is how do we raise awareness so that our behaviors and our languages can change so that we're being more loving. So that's one of the things that I appreciate about claiming a month for something like this is it raises that awareness. So as we think about this a little more, I think about a term called microaggression. And sometimes people just don't know what microaggression is. And they don't know that sometimes they don't know that they're actually doing it. So Danielle, could you help us understand what microaggressions are, and in particular to someone with a disability?
Yeah, so a microaggression is essentially a unintentional it's an unintentional, it can be unintentional or it can also be intentional statements that demonstrates a form of bias or prejudice, particularly within the disability community. You'll often hear a lot of individuals with disabilities talk about the term inspiration porn, which is essentially when non-disabled people will say, "Oh, you're so inspiring," but then they don't actually talk about, what makes us inspiring. Is it just because we have a disability, or is it because of the accomplishments and what we've been able to do? But it definitely can be really harmful because of the fact that words hurt. And I think the other part of it is just understanding how we can do it differently. I think another form that often occurs is when non-disabled people will try to talk for a individual with a disability, when an individual, like everybody else, can speak for themselves. And I think the big thing is that if someone isn't sure, ask a question before you make that assumption.
That's so helpful. Permission to just ask a question, right? We talk about often in so many other contexts. Parker Palmer, this is great spiritualist and theologian, talks about leaning in with wonder. When you feel anxiety rising, lean in with wonder, and that wonder should take us to places of more graciousness and asking questions. Ryan, I know I've heard you talk before about inspiration porn and how it can be so frustrating for you. You want to share a little bit about your experience with that can help other people stay away from that?
Well, like, the biggest example that I can give people is, like, people, like Danielle said, people say, "Oh, you're so inspiring because of, what you've done with your disability." Well, why am I inspiring? If my disability was taken out of the equation, you wouldn't think that it was inspiring for me to be at church or to be, buying I always say buying macaroni and cheese at Walmart, but everybody's always like, "Oh, it's so good to see you out." Like, I'm just living my life. Like, I mean, people always say that I'm so inspiring because of the amount of degrees I have and what I've done. And I mean, that's fine. But also, it took me 8 years to get my bachelor's because I could not decide what I wanted to major in. And so it took, I mean, if I wasn't disabled and you heard me say that I had taken 8 years to get a bachelor's, then you would say, "What's wrong with you? Were you just lazy?" What, But now it's like, "Oh, he's disabled. Of course it took him 8 years." Like, I mean, that's kind of, no one's ever said that in those words, but that's kind of the tone that it takes, if you know what I mean. Like, "Oh, of course, that poor boy, he needs more time," and it's just really frustrating. So
Yeah,
sure.
I think a lot of times if people forget to realize that we're human beings too, and we have interests and dislikes, and are there things that we might have to do slightly differently? Yeah, but then that's all of us. If you go into 5 different houses, there's probably going to be 5 different ways of how they structure their day, especially if they have kids, or the types of meals they're eating. And I think that's what makes the fabric of our nation amazing, because it's through our differences that we can really strengthen our community and understanding what we all bring to the table.
Amen to that, for sure. Yeah. And again, I think along with this part of the conversation with language, it opening our hearts and minds to loving our neighbor more fully. The American with Disabilities Act said, like, we need to make spaces more accessible to people. What does it say to you when a space isn't accessible, or when a space is accessible?
I think when it's not accessible, I think it contradicts, when we say all are welcome. If we're really truly saying all are welcome, then that also should include how buildings are, and then not only that, too, the programming to ensure that we have, for instance, tools to be able to help individuals who might have hearing loss, or who might need braille forms of communication. But certainly, though, it's all about making sure that we think out of the box, because the more we're able to think about everyone and what that looks like, the more we're able to welcome our friends and our beloved neighbors. So I think it really, it's just respecting everybody, and it's thinking about different aspects of living. And I think that's, that can be amazing. But at the same time, I think, oftentimes what I've seen is that a lot of non-disabled people often fear disability, and it questions their humanity. So it's kind of breaking down that barrier too, that it's okay to say disability. And then being able to recognize that, particularly if someone was born with a disability, that's a part of who they are, essentially. That it doesn't define them, but that's what they've known in that experience. And I'm a firm believer that God doesn't make any mistakes. And I know, for me as an individual with a disability, I know that the opportunities that I've had to be able to touch people's lives, I don't know if I would have had that if I didn't have my disability.
Thank you for that. Yeah. And Ryan, I'd love to hear your thoughts about access and accessibility, but there's a great piece there, Danielle, that we'll go to next about language. And speaking about person. But Ryan, I'd love to have your perspective and voice to that too, to access.
Well, Jad, it's interesting that we're talking about this on the cusp of LGBTQ Pride Month, because I'm also a member of the LGBTQ plus community. And so I would like to be able to go to the Pride celebrations that we have here in the city of Orlando. And the biggest one is in October, around National Coming Out Day, because it's so hot in Orlando that we don't like to do it in June. But I can't really go there. There's a lot of it that is on the grass, and my chair can't get to it. Like, it's in the big round part of Lake Eola, and only about half the booths are accessible. And even amongst my own community, people are always like, I know this is getting a bit off topic, but people are always like, well, you're not gay. What are you doing here? It's like, people don't assume that because I have a disability, I have the same desires as a normal adult, gay male. So they're like, oh, well, you're not gonna get a romantic partner. What are you anyway? a lot of it is not accessible, and I feel othered in my own community because they don't have a lot of, well, I can't say. The last time I tried to attend that Pride was before the pandemic, so I can't say it might have changed, but last time I went, I ended up leaving within 2 to 3 hours because I felt so uncomfortable and unsafe there, because it wasn't accessible. So
thank you for that. And so I mean, what is that? Yeah, it says that I'm not welcome here, I'm not thought about here, I'm not considered.
Yeah, with a community that, we're supposed to be love is love, and it's just love, and we're welcoming and we want equality, and yet members of my own community don't show me equality. I mean, they're like, what's that guy in the wheelchair doing here? So I just don't feel welcome and included. I don't feel accessible. The Spectrum Center is not accessible. I mean, it's too small. I can't get around. So sorry. That just really struck a chord with me when you were asking that question. So that's where I went. And
I'm glad you did, because this is what we want to do with these podcasts. We want to, I mean, you guys have heard us pastors talk. We just kind of go on a little bit to have open conversation, to raise awareness so that we can do better. So something else I think about, so I'm grateful, Ryan. You don't have to apologize for sharing your perspective and your voice, right? It's a value and important to have and to hear. So something else with disability pride, something I think of is ableism, which a lot of people again aren't aware of. And I wonder how we might help other people understand their ableism or their ableistic tendencies, right? So how would y'all talk about helping someone understand, hey, that's ableist, what you said there, that is doing hurt and harm to people, to your neighbor. It's not loving them, right? I think as Wesleyans, do no harm, do good. To refrain from ableism is to do no harm, right? So I wonder, how you can help our listeners, at least, or it's not me, be more aware of that.
Ryan, you want to take the lead on this one?
Well, Danielle, maybe you can help me define in a way that people could understand ableism, because I know how I would define it, but I don't think that's the most clear definition. And I tend to do it with a little bit of sarcasm.
You?
Yeah. So maybe I'll let you define it first. I do have a lot to say about it, but if you don't mind defining.
I don't know if I'm going to say it better, but so right. Ableism essentially is like, for instance, most people are familiar with racism or sexism. Essentially it's a form of prejudice towards individuals with disabilities. Oftentimes, there is intentional prejudice, but most times what I have found is that a lot of people remain really ignorant about some of those different biases that tend to be more ableist in the way of how they think about individuals with disabilities. Oftentimes, people think about individuals with disabilities as being inferior or not able, when in reality, most people are able to do things. They just might do things slightly differently, and being able to normalize what's different. And I think that's one of the biggest things that our society has a lot of issues. We see things as normal and abnormal, and anything that doesn't fit into that box, people get scared of, when in reality, it's okay, so that's the broad scope of it. If you want to narrow that down, Ryan.
Well, for me, I mean, there are different degrees of ableism. Like we talk about microaggressions and like big deliberate aggressions, but like ableism for me, I feel like is really targeted towards me because my disability is cerebral palsy and I use a power wheelchair. So it's really visible, and people, the biggest ableist comments that I get are about my wheelchair, and like they'll, like, whether it be a bus driver or something, saying I have a wheelchair on board and just referring to me as a wheelchair. Or the other day I was somewhere and someone thought I was going too fast, and they said the wheelchair comes barreling through, like, and I'm sitting right here, and I can hear you. But then, I mean, if I say something about it, like, you could talk to me about it. I'm sitting right here. You don't have to talk to whoever about it. Then I come across as a jerk. And it's just, that's why I'm kind of sarcastic about ableism, because like I feel like people should know better, but I also know that if you're not confronted with things, you're just not gonna think about it. You know what I mean? So,
and I think one of the things that that's helped me to be able to engage people is asking them how they would feel if that comment was made for them, because the reality is that disability is a minority group that essentially anybody can join at any point in time. Because you think about if you've ever have broken an arm or broken a leg or had a temporary disability where cancer is a classified diagnosis in the ADA. Any form of illness or physical disability temporarily, think about how you would want to be treated in that space. Because it matters. And I think it takes someone experiencing that for that light bulb to go off and they're like, oh, now I get it. But it's important,
It's so important
because disability it's not all bad. And, I think I've seen a lot of podcasts recently that have talked about how disability has helped them to think about problem solving in a different way and thinking out of the box. And, there's a lot of advantages to it, but you have to be able to think about it. And it's taken me a long time, like Ryan, to get to that place to where I say, I love myself because of how God created me and being an individual with a disability. But I've gotten to that place, but I a lot of times, people don't always realize that individuals with disabilities can have jobs too. And so when I'm out and about, and, recently I was at an event and someone came up to me and they had asked which event I was participating in. And I told them, I was like, well, I'm actually not participating in the event. I said, I'm a staff member. And their expression was, oh, and I'm like, really? Like, I hold a job and I pay my bills like everybody else. It's just, I live my life just like everybody else. And that's okay.
Yeah. So ableism is also a way of thinking and being that sees a person with disabilities as lesser.
Yep.
Would that be a good additional definition?
Yes.
I think so. Yeah.
I know for me, my disabilities are, and Danielle used this language, it was so helpful for me, invisible. Right. I read really, really slow. And if I've never read it before, I'm going to get lost. And so I work hard at it, but it's invisible. But I also try to talk for me, this is for me and how I live into I try to talk about mine in ways that are normalizing, right? Because mine are invisible. Right. Ryan, you don't have to talk about your motorized chair because it's there. People can see it. And I love how you're direct with people about like, hey, I'm here, like that sarcasm, because it does normalize, hey, I'm here, right? And you, Danielle, saying, I work here, like, yeah, I'm like, and you're removing that ableism, and at least the moment where it happens and says, this doesn't define me, this isn't right. So I know that it's something I've tried to do and to help normalize it, because mine is invisible. But that leads us to like the last bit of our conversation. We've been kind of dancing around it a little bit, but actually doing a lot of it is language. Language we use, language evolves over time. I've heard a lot of different experts in different fields talk a lot about definitions and dictionaries, that they're descriptive, not prescriptive, right? Definitions are, and that's why the words evolve and change, and how we use words evolve and change. I know when I first came to full grips with my disability, I started using the term, I'm a person with different abilities. My brain works differently. But I've heard from other people said, well, like, that doesn't fit me, and I don't want to appreciate that. And, we used to, have these parking spaces, and we called them handicapped. That's not language that's helpful and meaningful. And so could you all, as I'm thinking of listeners, St. Lucas, who are hearing this conversation and desperately wanting to follow Jesus more, love their neighbor more. And if they're using language that is ableist, if they're using language that is microaggressions, that they want to stop doing that and find better ways of communicating. What are some more helpful language for people as they're seeking to have pride around disabilities and loving their neighbor more?
Jad, could I address the handicapped parking?
Please.
Because I feel like a lot of people do not understand why that is so offensive. And we think about a handicap in golf, right? That's something that gives you like, I'm not a golf expert, but like you have so many things over par. Someone forgive me if I'm saying it wrong, that gives you kind of an advantage or a disadvantage. But the term handicapped, as referred to by the handicap parking, means someone who was putting their hand out for a handout. That's like in the, like, people with disabilities didn't always have the rights that we have. All the choice that we had was to like be institutionalized or, be beggars basically, because we didn't have access to free public education until the passage of the ADA. So when you're saying something about somebody being handicapped, you really are calling them lesser. You're calling them basically a burden on society. So like if I hear someone say handicap, oh, he's handicapped, my handicapped friend, or let's go to the handicap parking, it feels like you're punching me in the face. And I mean, and that's a little bit harsh, because I know a lot of people probably don't realize that, but I do, and like, it's just really hurtful. And even me, there's internalized ableism, because we've heard it all of our lives. So whenever I get flustered, or whenever I'm trying to get someone, like the bus driver will ask me, where do I park? Where do I do this? And I'm like, just go to the handicap parking. And then I'm like, I just use that word about myself,
Yeah.
But it was programmed in me for so long. In the 90s, when I was growing up, that's what it was called. You're handicapped.
Right.
Right. So, but yeah, I don't like the term handicap. Please do not use that word.
Now, and if you look at the signs, at St. Luke's, they say accessibility.
Yeah, they
Mhm.
say accessible parking now. That's
So
what
we
you
don't use
do.
that terminology, but we got to deprogram ourselves from hurtful terminology.
I
Some
think the other,
people. Oh, sorry,
ahead,
Danielle.
Ryan.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, I was gonna say, one of the words that always kind of rubs me the wrong way is when people will say, "Oh, you're so special," or special needs. I'm like,
Mm.
no.
Yeah.
Like a lot of people, like a lot of individuals with disabilities really look at special needs as a really a derogative term, because
Mm.
there's not really, I mean, we all have different needs, and we all have, our health is going to be different. There's not anything special about that. And a disability is just that, a disability. We don't have to, we don't have to tiptoe around that word. We can just call it what it is.
Yeah, and that's what I was gonna say. Danielle put it
Mhm.
more eloquently than I could, but a lot of people have a problem with the term disability, but
Mhm.
that's what it is. I mean, that's what I don't know what else to call it. That's what I've called it my entire life, and it's not a bad word. I have a
No.
shirt though that has that says "Don't diss my ability." I really like that one
Yeah.
because it's like, don't take my ability to do something for granted just because I get around differently than you. You know, like.
Mhm.
Right. Right.
So,
Yeah, I
But
think
I think
of
one of the things,
go ahead, Danielle.
well, I was going to say, I think a lot of times people like, they don't recognize that, for instance, for individuals who might use a scooter or a wheelchair, that's just an instrument that helps them get around. It's not in understanding too that our bodies, that's not public access. Like, you don't have to come up to me and say, let me put my hand on you and pray for your healing. Like,
oh
no,
God.
like, come on now. Like,
Yeah.
I think, and Ryan, and you can probably explain this more, in the fact that if you're coming up and you think that someone needs help, especially if they're using a wheelchair, don't just grab their wheelchair and push them. Like, ask before you automatically assume.
Mhm. Okay, because my wheelchair, like my electric wheelchair is super sensitive, and if you grab the joystick, it's gonna go. Like, I mean,
Right.
especially the setting that I have it on because I know how to drive the wheelchair. And then people like the bus driver will try to help me get in place, most likely because they're impatient
Yeah.
and they think I'm doing it fast enough, and they'll grab my joystick and it'll cause me to like lurch forward.
Yeah.
And I'll be like, whoa. And then they'll be like, you should turn your chair down slower. And I'm like, no, you shouldn't grab my chair because
Yeah.
you don't know how to drive it. You know,
So,
Right.
I had
so
it set for
Ryan,
me, not you, you know.
So Ryan, you and I both know that, back in the day, we would hear that term, wheelchair bound, very frequently. How would you encourage St. Lukers to be able to frame that, to reframe that?
So wheelchair bound makes it sound like my wheelchair is restricting me. It is not restricting me. My wheelchair is my freedom. I am not bound to a wheelchair. I am freed by a wheelchair. If I'm
Wow.
out of my wheelchair and I'm on the couch or I'm in my bed, I have to wait for someone to get me out. Then I'm bound. I'm not bound if I'm in my wheelchair, and even members of my own family have used that, said you're bound to a wheelchair. And I got into a knockdown, drag out fight with a member of my family and was like, no, I'm not. My wheelchair is my freedom. And if you actually knew me, you would understand that. Sorry.
No. Yeah.
I
That's
just get
again,
super
that's helpful.
impassioned,
Yes. You should.
So,
And so that leads me to a simple rule is that, and you tell me if I'm off base here, but person first,
yes.
the individual first.
So it's a person with a wheelchair, a person with a disability. And so I say, or a person that uses a wheelchair, I say wheelchair user. So
Mhm.
that is saying wheelchair first, but it's different because it's bringing attention to the person,
Mhm.
like, so I say I use a wheelchair. I'm a wheelchair user because uh, that shows the wheelchair for what it is, a device,
Mhm.
Right.
it's,
Right.
you know,
Well, and I think also just in how we think and behave person first also, right?
Mhm.
right.
That if we begin with someone as a beloved child of God, who they are, um, if we begin with that, that leads us to better, more healthy places where we're doing
Yeah.
less and less harm, and then we're more open to being corrected when it comes to language.
Mhm.
Right? I would think we're more willing to learn as opposed to being defensive about,
Yeah.
terminology. Well, when I grew up, it was this and this and that. Well, it's different now, right? We know now that this has been hurtful to people and harmful to people. So, and I'm so grateful to both of you for giving us your time, to share your perspective. And like I began with, I'm just so grateful for the both of you for being a part of St. Luke's, and you each add such unique beauty from your gifts, the gifts and graces that you have within you. And I wish more and more people would be willing to jump in and be a part of community of faith the way you all have, because everybody who comes to St. Luke's helps make it a better place, and I'm grateful for both of you to being a part of that. Danielle, can you, as we close out, can you tell us some of the things that are up and coming with the DEI and when it comes to persons with disabilities?
Yeah, so we are currently working on a resource page, so that way if you know of someone who has a disability, or you yourself has a disability and you're looking for some resources, we're starting to put that together. And then we're also looking at, I know there's been some discussions about including disability into Shalom as well. So and then certainly we'll be having some social media posts. I'm sure by the time this comes out, those posts will have occurred, but certainly those will be forthcoming as well. So yeah.
Awesome.
And then
Great.
I think that there's been some discussions too about just kind of looking at how we can ensure that our building is also accessible and making sure that that's welcoming to everybody.
Yes, that's ongoing. But as we built the treehouse, we wanted to make sure that it was accessible, and not just with a ramp, but a ramp that would hold an electric chair, right? And the same thing with Founders Hall. And so we're going to retrofit some spaces and make them more accessible. And I think it's all of our lives. We're learning how to be more accessible to the grace and love of Jesus Christ, and make ourselves more accessible to our sisters and brothers and siblings around us. So again, I'm grateful for both of you all and our time together. And for listeners, I hope to see you on Sunday for worship, either online on Facebook or YouTube, or in person and worship with us. But know that you're in our thoughts and prayers, and hope you have a blessed week, and that this conversation has blessed and challenged and encouraged you.